This podcast is hosted by the Institute for Addressing Strangulation. Today's topic, strangulation and young people.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm joined here by Vicky and Lucy from the Sex Education Forum, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a moment. But we're going to be talking today about strangulation, in particular thinking about how we communicate strangulation in an educative way, and what that looks like within schools and education settings more broadly. So thank you again for joining us. Lucy, I'll start with you. Please, could you introduce yourself?
Hello, Harriet. Yes, I'm Lucy Emerson, Chief Executive at the Sex Education Forum, and we bring together over 75 partner organisations working together for the best possible relationships and sex education for children and young people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Vicky, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, yes, I work with the Sex Education Forum and also with on a few other projects, including with the NHS. And I'm working as a deliverer, I guess, of resources and creator of resources. And I've also worked for a very long time in schools as a PSHE and relationships and sex ed teacher and heading that sort of department, if you like. And so I've done a lot of thinking about how we approach difficult issues and discuss them with young people.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And so I suppose we thought it might be helpful to start with setting the scene a bit and why we're talking about strangulation now and why it's particularly timely with regard to perhaps the new guidance that's been delivered by the government with regard to what educators should be providing in terms of sex and relationships education. So Vicky or Lucy, do you have any thoughts on kind of why we're talking about strangulation now, where this has come from, and where you've seen a change or shift, I suppose, with your work with the Sex Education Forum? I don't know, Lucy, do you want to start off with that?
Thank you. Well, it's a huge milestone to be including strangulation in RSHE guidance, and not something that is really a fun thing to do, but it is something of great urgency in terms of public health messaging for young people and for adults more broadly. And a really important way of communicating that there is no safe way to strangle. So the guidance is the updated guidance is a really useful way of being able to ensure that as many young people as possible understand that message, and that it's part of their broader relationships and sex education.
Definitely. And Vicky, do you have any thoughts, I suppose, either with that hat on as being an educator yourself or now working with Sex Education Forum around strangulation in particular, and how you've seen maybe has there been a change in how we are talking about this during sex and sex education?
Yes, I think so. I think one of the things that we've noticed, and we were discussing this earlier today actually, is how initially things like choking and strangulation were considered fringe activities that a few people indulged in and they enjoyed it or didn't, and it was kind of not really a big thing. And what's really happened with the more widespread use of porn, for example, is that things that used to be considered fringe are now being marketed and targeted at us as things we should be trying. And I think that's having a really big impact on the kind of pressures that young people are facing in particular, because we're looking at young people here. But as Lucy said, actually, this applies to anyone having sex with anyone, we're facing new pressures as to what is supposed to be normal. And we're normalizing practices that used to be considered less common. And that includes strangulation. And no matter how widespread you think it might be, it doesn't make it safe.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to further your point about what's being expected, it's not, from what I've seen and the work that we've done in this area, it's not just about people are being expected to try this and give it a go. They're kind of expected to enjoy it because you've got that presentation, particularly within porn. Porn is designed to be something that is seen as people enjoying themselves and getting that pleasure from an activity. So it isn't even just try it and see how you feel about it, whilst that still has its own risks around the harm that could be caused by doing this even once. It's about you do it and you've got to enjoy it. And maybe the subtext to that is, if you're not enjoying it, is there something wrong with you? Is that an issue? Will your partner not like you anymore because you don't like it? And I think that takes it even further into a difficult arena around being an expected part of the sexual script, as sort of the language that quite like around this, because it's quite helpful to understand how normalized it is and how expected it is.
Yeah, and people need to have the understanding and the information to enable them to say, actually, I really don't want to do this thing. And there's a very good reason why. And hopefully we'll, as we go on and talk about this some more, we'll talk about the fact that it's not just, oh, I might kill someone or someone might kill me. It's all the nuanced issues that can happen over time with damage. And Lucy and I were talking earlier about, you need your airways open. They are supposed to be open for us to breathe, to get oxygen to our brains. My other background is biology, so I am a biologist, a biology teacher of 20 years experience, and one of the fundamental things we teach is the way we get oxygen to our brain is through the blood, and the blood vessels need to take that oxygen to the brain so we can think. And if the oxygen's not reaching the brain, you can't think. You can't give continuous consent. You can't make decisions. You can't actually necessarily even decide at that point that you'd like to stop. So that gets us all into the weeds with consent, which we'll hopefully discuss a bit more as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is starting to perhaps do some of that myth busting as well, because sometimes we hear and see things that suggest that this is about purely about restricting the windpipe, and that brings its own challenges around, as you say, kind of getting oxygen in and where that needs to go in the body. But it's the blood vessels as well, and some sort of, in air quotes, safe ways of strangulation or choking that have been suggested around avoiding the windpipe. But then, as you say, that prevents the blood from carrying the oxygen to the brain. So again, we go back to that point, which we'll probably say many times, that there's no safe way to do it. You can't provide mitigation for that if that's the act that you do.
Yeah, and even if the damage isn't instant, and even if it's not obvious, even if both partners feel completely fine afterwards, we know now from the evidence that people like yourselves have been accumulating that damage builds up over time, and it can actually lead to quite serious health consequences later. A bit like smoking, everyone thinks you're fine while you're smoking when you first start smoking, but the damage, you can't avoid the damage over time, and so even for people who escape urgent consequences, that doesn't mean they've escaped altogether. And I think that's another thing that we need to be very clear about in terms of people educating on this.
Yeah, and I think that sort of leads into the next question, really, about what views do you see about this topic. So we've addressed maybe one side of the spectrum, but we know that there are people who do use strangulation during sex and do get pleasure from that. So are you seeing people with those different views? Are you seeing one particular perception of this, I suppose, through your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think educators will have their own perceptions, their own feelings about strangulation, and probably quite a lot of fears around addressing this in the classroom, even if they haven't, especially if they haven't had the opportunity to think about what it means to them and how they feel about it themselves. And I think what we find with relationships and sex education, almost with any topic, is that you need a mixture of elements. You need to have some really clear facts, based on research. So we need to be covering facts about health, facts about the law, other bits of knowledge. And educators as well need to be really clear about their own knowledge base on this. And then we need to also have that scope to open up discussion around the feelings and the values it might throw up for people. There has to be a way of bringing that into the room, hearing it without passing judgment on people, because that's such a real and strong force in people's lives, how we feel about things, what emotions, where the pressures are. But also we need to move on to some practical things. So making sure we can go back to those facts, go back to the skills you need in different situations, real life situations, to deal with that. So making sure you're not somebody who's pressurizing somebody else. If you're feeling pressurized around something, what can you do with it? What are the words you might need to use, or the actions? And then any lesson isn't complete without some really good signposting. So making sure every time this comes up, we're signposting young people again to the best sources of help and support. And if you kind of have that kind of process in your mind as an educator, it works with a topic like strangulation, even though it may be a bit newer to us. But yes, there should be a point where we can say, how are we feeling about this? But you need to have those other bits of the package there as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think one of your points that you made about kind of if educators haven't had chance to think about this yet. And so myself and a colleague were lucky enough to join some of your members at a session where we delivered some information about strangulation, and we were able to ask them whether they delivered this kind of content already and whether they did that proactively or reactively. And I think the majority of respondents either weren't addressing this currently, which is not surprising. This is still very new, as you say, or they were addressing it, but in a reactive way. So if somebody else were to, or somebody in the room was to bring it up, and I can imagine that provides huge challenges, like you say, Lucy, if they've not had the opportunity to consider that topic before or how to approach it. And I can imagine there's a lot that they could probably transfer from other topics, I would have thought. I don't know, I would be interested to hear your views on that. But it is nuanced in its own way as well. What kinds of responses or fears, I suppose, perhaps, have you heard from educators around approaching this topic? I'd be interested to know.
Oh, I think one of the main fears would be, if I'm explaining something about strangulation, am I giving people an idea they didn't have before? Am I going to make them do it? And yet we know with so many other aspects of RSE that isn't true from a research basis. And that's going to be something that parents are probably going to be thinking about as well. And we have to go back to the research that we know young people are being exposed to very graphic imagery around strangulation, and the chances are at the moment that that's coming to them before any adult has used any words to define what it is and what the risks are about it. So that gives us a very stark choice. But also it's then kind of unpacking it a bit and thinking, well, we're not going to be introducing strangulation in a graphic way. We're going to be scaffolding the learning that young people need to be safe and make the best choices they can for themselves. And then we have to kind of look at, well, what does that look like? Where's our starting point? And the guidance is saying very clearly, this is not just about responding to the odd question that might come up and making sure those young people know about it. This is part of a core curriculum. We need to plan it, think about where it's best positioned, when it's best positioned, and probably not cover it as a one-off lesson that we can just tick off, but think about anchor points when we're teaching about consent, we're teaching about coercion, elements of pornography, which still is a work in progress in terms of making sure that's covered fully. And as Vicky mentioned, take those opportunities when we're talking about anatomy and biology to get some of those facts about our bodies in place. And that doesn't need to have any mention of sex at all. So it's been quite creative.
If I can chip in on that one, I was thinking one of the things that would be so brilliant, if any heads or curriculum planners are out there listening to this, it would be so helpful if in biology, when kids are learning about airways and they're learning about how we get oxygen into our bodies, if strangulation was not sexual strangulation at all, but just the idea of choking and why choking of any kind, whether you choke on an apple in a restaurant or whether someone actually tries to choke you, why that is dangerous. And why any constriction of the neck is dangerous, because it interferes with how oxygen is getting into the body and getting to the brain. And if that was just mentioned in passing every time someone teaches about breathing and like that, it would hugely add a sort of element of seriousness, and kids make connections, and they'd be able to go, oh, hang on a minute, I learned that in biology. If I restrict my airways, I can't breathe and I can't think. And then you come in your RSE lesson and you talk about why this is actually potentially dangerous. They're going to make the connection and be like, oh yeah, that makes total sense, as opposed to thinking, someone's trying to stop my fun. It makes it all much more logical, if you like, which is what it is. And we almost need to take it out of the arena of weird sexual practices, which is where it's been for a while. And don't mess with my sexual practices, that's private to me. And actually this is a safety, as Lucy keeps saying, it's a public health, a safety message we're trying to put across.
Yeah, that's so important, thinking about removing the context, because our medical director will say all the time, your blood vessels don't know if you're consenting or not. And so taking that context of sex or possibly, mixed martial arts or domestic abuse or physical assault, taking all of those contexts away, the anatomy is the same and the impacts will be the same.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's what we were talking about also this morning. thinking about what we wanted to say, and how this issue of restriction of blood flow over time can have long-term consequences for stroke and things like that as well. So it is just biology, as you say. You know, this isn't in a way, this isn't really about what you want to do and when you want to do it. It's just a fact that these practices aren't safe, and currently we haven't yet found a safe way of doing them. And if we find a safe way, sure, the research will tell us, and we can all publicize that, and then people can make up their minds. But currently there just isn't one, no matter what you would like to be doing. And I think it's a sort of sad fact, and people need to know that, and it sort of almost remove the whole, not remove sex from it, because obviously it's important in the context of sex, but it's important in that they understand this isn't about spoiling fun.
So, yeah, on that note, there's some really helpful principles in the new government RSHE guidance, and one of them is about positivity, and there is some new language in the guidance explaining that young people should know that sex should be a positive, enjoyable experience for those involved. So just sort of holding that in mind, educators might want to sort of look at their curriculum and think if they are taking opportunities in a variety of places to set that kind of narrative about sex. Because if that is in place elsewhere, it takes a bit of the pressure off thinking, oh, strangulation might have been the one place we were going to talk about fun and sex. No, that shouldn't be the point, that those two are kind of all put together. Let's look beyond at the whole curriculum. So whilst we're talking about one particular element today, it actually does feed into look at the curriculum as a whole. Has it got positivity in there? Is it engaging for your learners? Is it responsive to what they're asking at this particular age? You know, keep looking at what those anonymous questions are that are coming up. You know, that will also give out those sort of red flags of, we've got a lot of students in, I don't know, year 8 who are asking questions to do with choking, or maybe they'll use some slightly different language for it. That would be a warning sign to the school, and you'd need to look at the timing of when you're being more proactive in putting these messages out. So yeah, there are kind of different threads into the planning here that are really important to pay attention to. And alongside that, there are threads around communication and sort of having that clear plan about what you're going to teach, that students know what's coming, so they're not sort of taken off guard, and that parents know these are topics we're going to be covering and why. And that will help to deal with those worries we were talking about earlier, thinking, oh, how might parents react? How might people think this is going to play out? And busting some of those myths.
Yeah. Go on, Vicky. Did you want to come into that?
Yeah, no, because we were talking about one of your questions that you put sort of as things you might want to talk about today was when you teach about this, and we thought about that a bit as well. And we thought if you think your young people are at the stage and age where they are ready to hear about things like sexual assault and rape and things like that, then they are definitely ready to be hearing about strangulation as a practice. And obviously, age-wise, that's going to vary slightly as to what's going on for kids in special education, for example. That's going to vary as well. But in a lot of schools, that's going to be around about sort of 14, 15. Basically, what we want to be trying to do is protect people before they find themselves in a situation. And so there's often a parental fear that they shouldn't be learning about things they're not into yet. And that's kind of true, but it's also kind of not true, in the sense that where would you rather someone learns about something that is potentially really harmful? Would you rather they learned about it in a safe environment in a classroom where they can discuss their fears and concerns, or would you rather they were kind of out there with a potential partner, or finding something in the wilds online with no one to discuss it through, or to put things in context for them? So I think, again, what Lucy was saying about, if you plan this stuff really carefully, and you can plan to approach parents before it happens and tell them why you're teaching about this, what you're planning on teaching, and make it really clear. We're not teaching techniques here. That is the last thing we are doing. In fact, the very opposite of that. We're saying there is no safe technique. You know, there isn't a way of doing this that's going to be better than another way. There just isn't. You know, at the moment, as far as we know, there is nothing that you can do safely here. So making it really clear, parents know about that beforehand. But then, as Lucy was also saying, being really alert to what's coming up organically. Are people showing evidence of having come across this before? Has some TV program come out where this is being referred to as perfectly normal and fine? in which case we need to be getting in there quickly and addressing this earlier with the year group, but not forgetting parents and making sure they know why we suddenly approaching their year 8 children with a topic as difficult as this. There's a really good reason. We think they're coming across this anyway. We want to head this off at the pass with actual facts and not incorrect information.
Yeah. And I'd like to come back to parents in a second, but I think those points that you're making around kind of where should this topic be broached? Let's assume that certain children within that group, or possibly everyone within that age group, haven't heard about strangulation before. Isn't this the best place for it to come in? Because I think it would be really interesting to know, for people who didn't know or don't know that strangulation is a practice during sex, what their thoughts on it are, and actually when you then present them with that topic in an objective, factual, research-based way, what their view on it is, compared to if they're seeing it, for example, for the first time in porn, when it's presented as this pleasurable experience for everyone. Surely that makes, as you were saying, Vicky, logical sense. And we're running a prevalence survey at the moment, and in that we're going to ask people. It's not restricted to people who have had an experience of strangulation during sex. It's anyone, and it's also not restricted to people who have even heard about it. So it could well be that we get respondents who have never even heard about it as a practice. And what we really want to do is look at their responses compared to people who have. And it might be that they have a very set, possibly overwhelmingly negative view on it because they didn't know it was a thing that people do. And that's their view on it. And then people's view on it might differ depending on their own experience. And that's what we want to see. But I think that's an interesting concept, that just because of presenting it, it's seen as presenting it positively.
Yeah, I think so. And on the whole positive front, again, what Lucy was saying, that are you talking about sexual relations and sexual interaction as a positive thing more widely? Because one thing we keep on hearing from young people in our annual surveys and in our conversations with young people generally is that it's very easy to talk about everything that's wrong in relationships and sex, and to give them this view that it's all terrible and terrifying, and and that's really not what we want to do at all. We want to be teaching them what's healthy and how to make great choices so that they have a brilliant relationships life and a sex life, and that that's fun and enjoyable for them. And so one of the things, again, that's a very tricky issue for teachers to engage with, and for parents to be comfortable with teachers engaging with, is pleasure. But again, young people keep on telling us they want to understand pleasure, and it doesn't have to be graphic. Again, it's really early on, really early on, even from primary school, the idea that your body is a great thing, and some things feel good, whether it's the wind on your skin, or when you're talking about little kids, and the feeling of the sun on your skin, and the idea that is a feeling of pleasure, and that is good. And then as they get slightly older, just the idea that when someone touches you, it should feel great. And so if we kind of nest this within that, if we've taught them fundamentally that it should feel good and you should be happy with what's going on, then it's less terrifying to then talk about how does it feel when things are not so great, and why might there be a problem there. And it's a much better way, I think, of then introducing things like this, if they're not seeing sex as a terrifying bad thing which is likely to go wrong, but their bodies want it anyway. Oh damn. We don't want it to be like that.
Such a good point. And I think also that brings me on to something else that I wanted to talk about, which is there will be people, most likely, maybe not in every classroom or every setting, but who have done this and have enjoyed it. And I think then having a space that, going back to, I think it was your point, Lucy, about being non-judgmental, having a space that's also open for them to still get all of the information that we would want them to have, to be making decisions in a safe way, but not feel as though they're odd or peculiar or something else because they enjoy
or stupid thing. Yeah,
true.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that pleasure conversation is so helpful, and it cuts across all of the topic of strangulation, because it should feel good, but if it feels good, that sort of doesn't mean that it's necessarily a safe thing to do, and there'll still be risks involved, but it feels good, and that there's research to suggest that people do think it does feel good, and that's an impact that lots of people have reported having. So how do we address that, as well as people who do it or it's done to them and they go, never again, don't want to do that again?
Yeah, if I can just chip in on that, I think that the way you've just put that makes me really think about this, what Lucy said earlier about not just talking about this once, not having the strangulation lesson. So when you're talking with, maybe if you decide to introduce it in year 9, you're not going to be having that level of conversation with many kids, I would imagine, because hopefully there's not very many of them who are seeing it as a pleasurable thing, even if they've come across it that way in porn. You just want to kind of gently introduce the fact that there's no safe way of doing this, and probably not go into too much detail. But as they get older and are starting to maybe be more experimental, then that would be a more appropriate age and stage. Again, depending on what kids are coming up with. If you've got kids in your class who are talking about things, then you need to address it. But this is something you can keep coming back to and drip feed it in when you're discussing porn, or when you're discussing consent, or when you're discussing all sorts of things. And coming back to that point that, again, that you can't, consent is supposed to be continuous. If someone is limiting your airways, whether the blood vessel or the trachea, if your airways are limited, your brain is not able to work properly, just as it wouldn't with drugs or alcohol, and therefore you cannot give continued consent. You might have said yes at the beginning, you can't carry on giving consent, and if you can't carry on giving consent, it's not consent. And those sort of issues, and then you can explore the whole thing of pleasure, but it feels good. So, but you do that much, I would say, probably with an older or more mature group of pupils, generally speaking, unless it's come up organically earlier.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the government guidance starts off by explaining the how the topic should be covered, to explain the law on strangulation and suffocation. And this often happens with issues which are alarming in their own way, worrisome. We start off with the law because it feels like the safe thing, and we do need to explain the law. That's absolutely crucial. Young people may find that for them sits partly in a kind of I don't know, part of their own feelings about what's being judged as right, wrong. It's sort of that moral landscape to some extent. But also in the guidance, it's very clear that it needs to have public health messaging. And public health messaging isn't about the law. That's about our bodies and the realities of our bodies. And those two are distinct and different. So I think kind of treating them as distinctly and differently within the teaching is quite important. And it just got me thinking about a kind of third domain, which needs to be drip through the curriculum, and often is, which is around, well, either online safety, or we might think about media awareness and understanding about how these mechanisms work of the online environment and AI, and what content we're consuming online and social media. And young people are going to understand this better than anybody. They're the generation who are being targeted, but it's also going to be in their hands to shape this more in the future. And they do engage well when we start to look at the commercial side of it, how these systems work and how they would like them to work, what they find good about it, what they find more problematic about it. So I'd say that's kind of another area to bring in. It's not sort of how it's structured in the guidance, but the guidance has loads of potential for thinking about the online environment, online misogyny as well.
Yeah, how is the strangulation or choking being promoted to me? Why do I think it's normal? Is that because it's normal in society? Well, it has become more so. Why has it become more so quite recently? Well, guess what? It goes back to all the algorithms. And they're promoting something as normal, in which case everyone thinks, oh gosh, I should try this because everyone's trying it, even if they weren't initially. And now more people do try it, and it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think one of the things that I found really helpful with looking at completely different issues that are also fed to us through algorithms is pointing out to young people that their sense of agency is actually misplaced. They only have so much agency within an environment that keeps on feeding them stuff it thinks that they should be watching. And a lot of young people really don't like that idea that their agency is limited, and they want more agency. So then sort of saying to them, well, actually here you have to kind of make a really conscious choice around stuff like this, and kind of almost fight for your agency in this context.
And you're building critical thinking, right? It goes far beyond strangulation or sex or porn. It teaches you, unfortunately, to challenge what you're presented with, because that's the reality that we're living in now. And you see something and you don't know if it's AI, or you don't know if it's just been curated, or you don't know if it's just being sort of channeled to you. And I think going back to your point around educating for parents, almost, that makes it maybe more difficult, more complicated. How do you address that? What's the conversation there, I suppose?
I mean, I guess it goes back to using facts and research as what underpins everything in relationships and sex education. And, you know, through our work together with IFAS, you know, your integrity in using research to understand what is going on in society right now and sharing that in accessible ways with parents and carers and teachers and senior leaders in schools for them to understand. Like, you can't escape from those facts about how common strangulation has become and the outcomes of that in terms of health outcomes for people who've been impacted. And yeah, that, I think that has to be the way of kind of introducing and explaining for adults. And, you know, it's one conversation at a time or one communication at a time to try sort of bring people into a discussion about it, ask them what their questions are, what their fears are. And, you know, we found at Sex Education Forum, talking to our educators who are really familiar with the pedagogy of how to plan lessons well and teach on a range of sensitive topics, but they had some really interesting and varied questions, which suggested that they had somewhere further to go with their own knowledge and their own feelings about how they would integrate this into their practice. And it's no different for parents and carers, but it's a huge opportunity as well, because we need everyone to get involved with this education. We can't just say, schools, right now it's your turn, we put it in the government RSHE guidance, you can fix this. That shouldn't be the case with any topic. Parents need to know they've got a role to play, and here's some things you could also do with your young person at home that might make you feel more in control of these scary things as parents. It's not an either or, you know, everyone could have a role to play, but you can't really play that role as an educator until you feel okay about your own education on it. You can be honest about where your gaps in knowledge are, but you need to have something as a starting point. So go back to the facts and the research and then listen to those questions rather than kind of shutting them out. I think that's really important.
I think that curiosity is really helpful, just generally around possibly difficult or contentious topics, just sort of trying to understand where people are coming from, but also, as you say, Lucy, kind of showing them the research to suggest why they might be coming from that position, but why their under 16-year-old might be coming from a different place. And time and time again, research on this topic internationally as well is showing that we're seeing there is an age difference in who's experiencing this and taking part in this and seeing this. So it's completely understandable that you, as an over 35-year-old parent, potentially haven't seen any of this, and that there's a significant shift for your child. It makes complete sense, and it's maybe some of that reassurance as well. But I think, sorry, go on, Lucy.
Yeah, I was just thinking we should also think about the kind of, you mentioned the age range, and it doesn't just stop as being relevant up to the age of 16, does it? You know, we want to make sure young people are equipped with information before and to help prevent harm. But then, you know, we're very passionate at Sex Education Forum about lifelong learning, extending RSE into college years as well, making sure that education continues up to 18. And then I think this would be very relevant in the university years as well. I don't know if you've got any thoughts at IFAS about how we can kind of map out the needs of different age groups. But yeah, we'd really support seeing it be a continuous process.
Go on, Vicky, did you want to come in on that?
No, I was just thinking the same thing. I was thinking, if anything, those are the age groups that are probably more likely to be thinking that in inverted commas vanilla sex is you know, no good. When you first start having sex, perhaps you are so excited to be having sex at all. It varies a lot. Obviously, people who haven't had great experiences might not find that, but for a lot of young people, it's just great to be having any kind of sex. But then there becomes increasing pressure thanks to porn and thanks to algorithms and just the way media works now, to think, well, I should be trying new stuff. And so perhaps just at the very age at which we no longer have compulsory relationships and sex ed, is perhaps the age at which young people need most to be getting these messages around their sexual health and their practices, and just trying to make good decisions. So yeah, we need to think a lot more about how we can reach those age groups and those people.
I think that's such a good point, and I think it sort of the parallel, you bringing in universities, Lucy. I used to work in a university in a sexual violence support service, and we were very aware that if you just give all your important information to new students just during Freshers Week, then how well is that going to stick? How relevant or memorable is that going to feel compared to a sort of more drip feeding approach where you give messages continuously and you understand your demographic and you understand how to meet them where they're at those different stages of their trajectory with you in whatever organization or system that might be. So yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I suppose and maybe we finish on this, and it's maybe quite a big one, but I just wanted to also touch on another potential challenge that we've heard from educators around their concerns around educating around this topic. And we've talked a lot about the impact on the media of people's perceptions of strangulation, but also I think it's fair to say that there's an impact of the media and society more broadly's perceptions on teaching on this topic because of some of those misunderstandings that we've talked about. So I suppose I just wanted to touch on that a little bit about perhaps some of the concern from educators around a perception that you're going to talk about strangulation during sex education, so that automatically means that you're going to be teaching kids how to do it. Have you seen that impact on your members?
Mainly actually through press reports of it happening, rather than I have to be honest, and I suspect a bit of sensationalism there, rather than necessarily a huge amount of in-person stuff. But I do think educators are concerned to get this right. And we were sort of thinking earlier about how you don't want to get drawn down rabbit holes of technique. And what we were saying before is, what was quite likely to happen is the educators wouldn't actually set out to teach any techniques, but then young people who have tried things, especially perhaps a slightly older demographic, might be saying, well, but what if I did this? Or what if someone just did that? What if it was light pressure and I made sure they were telling me how it was going as they were going along, kind of thing? Would that be okay? And you get drawn down that rabbit hole, and then that comes back to parents as being taught techniques. Whereas in actual fact, it needs to be super clear when teachers are answering questions like that they keep coming back to the thing of, look, there isn't a safe way. The evidence at the moment shows that there is no safe way to do this thing. And we understand that you might have tried it, or you don't even use language like that, do you, in the classroom? Because we don't want to be highlighting anyone's individual experience. You can just say it doesn't matter what your individual experience has been. If you're aware of people who have managed to do this and they aren't dead, that doesn't mean that they haven't had any damage or won't have damage going forward. There isn't a safe way. And if you keep coming back to that, it's really hard to be misconstrued. And it's really hard for the information going back home to be incorrect. And if any incorrect information did go home, it would be pretty quick for other kids in the class to be going, no ways, that's not what we were told. And I think that's very important. And just not to be drawn into comparing techniques. That is one of the things we found our educators were kind of interested in, is there a way of avoiding that? And I think there way is to keep coming back, as Lucy says, come back to the research, come back to the research, come back to the research.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point, isn't it? And yeah, like you say, also we're not in the most part, I would imagine educators aren't experts on physiology, and maybe you're quite unique, Vicky, I don't know, in your background in biology, or maybe there are other people who do have that background, but that's not an expectation of that particular delivery in that particular setting. Right. But also it's not about being avoidant or purposefully obtuse and just saying, well, I just don't want to talk about it. Yeah. Actually, you are having the conversation as an educator, but ultimately that's the bottom line of it. You're not deliberately just trying to avoid the conversation. I think that's an important
that's a really good point. Yeah, we never want to shut conversations down on relationships and sex ed. You want to gently nudge them perhaps, but not shut them down, because it's when you allow a conversation to take place and guide it carefully, that you can deal with misconceptions and you can deal with concerns and you can actually become aware of concerns that you might not have been aware of before. So we don't want to shut things down. We do just want to make sure that the take-home message is really clear.
Yeah, I fully support that. And, having those good boundaries in place at the start of any lesson, so we know we're working in certain parameters in relationships and sex education. It's not about personal experience of the teacher or the students, but we're here to talk about things that matter. And this is quite new, and it's wonderful that there's an opportunity in the updated RSHE guidance to offer this education to the next generation. That's going to make such a huge difference. And in the process, we need to keep learning by asking educators, what are you still finding difficult? Where are the pinch points for you? How can we best support you? This is a big job. We're asking you to do something quite new. Let's put our efforts together as a society and try to support those educators and support parents, and also ask young people, how is this going for you? Are we getting these lessons right? How was this lesson? Maybe I haven't tried this one before. I'd like some feedback, because young people are should be active agents in their RSE as well as within their relationships and other aspects of their lives. So getting that feedback, evaluating and learning. I mean, I think within the next couple of years we could go a long way, really quite fast.
It can be really scary to ask young people what they think of your lesson when you've just taught it, or a few weeks later of a group of lessons or something. But actually, once you start asking and seeing what they say, it becomes quite addictive. You start realizing it's actually brilliant and really helpful and really useful. From the time I started asking those sorts of questions, it sort of changed my entire approach to teaching and became a lot more interactive and a lot more discursive and a lot more useful, I suspect. And from the feedback, a lot more relevant. And so, as Lucy says, that's a really vital part of working out how to do this well. Is just asking the kids, have I struck a useful tone here, or did I freak you out? It's that's a really great question to be asking.
That's really helpful, and I can imagine as well, the more you do that, the more you get positive feedback as well, and
Absolutely.
They feel as though they can say things, and then you do it, and then they go, actually, no, that was really good.
And the same thing with parents, what sort of messaging is coming home? Are we being told, because kids want to please us, that everything's fine, and they go home and go, and if they're not doing that, then that's really great. And quite often you'll hear that kids have come home and had really useful conversations with parents. And again, that's what you want. You want to actually be encouraging them to talk with their parents more, not shutting things down.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I was going to ask kind of at the end, how do we address some of the challenges that we've raised, but I think we've done that as we've gone along, and we've talked about, you both have provided some really good specific examples about how to have conversations, when to do it, where to do it, how to do that in a continued way. I feel like that's been a consistent point in our conversation, that this isn't just going to be a one-off. It can't be a one size fits all, and it can't be just a, here it is, we've done it, tick that box, let's move on. Is there anything else that either of you want to add about this topic and educating around this topic?
Lucy?
I guess just a message for senior leaders in schools and government ministers to put some investment into this, so that educators genuinely feel supported and not sort of having to tackle this by themselves, feeling unsure if they're on the right track.
That's a good point. We've been asking a lot of people, maybe, haven't we? Just do this, just say this. But it is a lot, actually. That's a really good reminder. Vicky, did you have any final things to add?
Oh, just to come back to the same point again, make sure that if you are going to teach about this, that your key message is that non-judgmental, not asking too many awkward questions about where somebody might be at already, but just accepting that people in your group might be at different places with this whole topic, but no matter where they're at, for them to understand there isn't a safe way to engage with this at the moment. As far as we know, there's no safe way. And if that's the message that comes across, then you've done your job, hopefully.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.